Hi guys, it's Chloe and welcome back to my channel. But today I'm going to be talking about choosing the right therapist for your individual or if you yourself need therapy and have a disability. Now, I'm going to be talking about PT, OT, speech therapy, and talking therapy. The only therapy I'm not going to be talking about is ABA because yes, I am autistic and there are different views on ABA. I'll feel comfortable talking about it eventually. Right now, I just need to find a way to phrase it. And I understand I am not a taco, so I'm not going to be able to please everybody, but I need to work on phrasing things first. And I am excited to get into this video. And on that note, we're going to get started. So, peds versus adults. So, with pediatric physical therapist, they see people up to age 18 or 21, depending on where you go, and they work more with individuals with chronic conditions versus something short term. So, for instance, if you sprained your ankle in school, a pediatric physical therapist would be able to help you should you need PT. But again, the majority of the population they see is more chronic, but that doesn't mean you can't go see a physical therapist for something like that. As an adult, it's the opposite, and they work more with people that have, you know, like short-term stuff, like a sprained ankle, versus something chronic like spina bifida or cerebral palsy. In the adult world, there's basically two different types of therapists. There's orthopedic, which works more with like the short-term conditions, and then there's neuro, which works more with the chronic conditions like the spina bifida and the cerebral palsy. Now, you may be thinking, how do I find a therapist? Great question. So, some of the ways you could do it is either number one, so my health insurance has a patient portal, and on there it says like find care, and under there you can type a person's name or facility and it'll pop up and let you know if they're in net. Or number two, you can do your own dirty work. Sadly, happens to a lot of people because our healthcare system, in my opinion, is broken. And you can like ask around in like support groups for your disability or your individual's disability, or you know just Google it, like pediatric physical therapist near me, and go on their website and take a look and etc. Now, as far as talking therapy, so the way I found my talking therapist was through research because a lot of talking therapists don't accept health insurance. So therefore, it was a lot harder, in my opinion, to find somebody through my health insurance patient portal because not a lot of them take or health insurance in general. Now, how my parents found my pediatric physical therapist, I don't know, because back then in the late 90s, when I was born, there weren't a lot of pediatric physical therapists like there are now. So that made it kind of more difficult to find somebody. And we ended up going through Children's Healthcare of Atlanta because they ended up merging like a couple months after my surgery, and that's around the time I started physical therapy. And then as an adult, so with the first physical therapist I saw, my mom went to go see her first, and then I just followed. And then with this new physical therapist, so basically, my old physical therapist worked for this big chain, and I figured it'd be easier to transfer my case over to just a different location that had a neuro rehab PT. That way, there wasn't any hassle. So I went online and I went on this chain's website and looked for the closest neuro rehab PT. Now, Before you go, it's best to familiarize yourself with your health insurance's policy. So, as far as like physical, occupational, and speech, for a lot of health insurances, they'll pay for 60 visits for peds and 20 visits for adults of each type of therapy per condition. So, like for instance, my health insurance only pays for 20 visits of physical therapy for my spina bifida. That's it. And it's the same across the board, regardless if you have like a chronic condition or not. I would also recommend whittling it down to 3 different therapists. And not to say that you're going to see all 3, but in the event that one falls through, you've got a backup. And again, I know this isn't feasible for everybody, but if you can do it, go for it. And if you're transferring from one facility to another, be sure that you transfer your medical records from that facility over as well. That way they can get accustomed to your case before you enter. In this way, too, if they're a good therapist, they should be able to tell you that they can't handle you. Now, as far as mental health therapy, like talking therapy, so again, you know, a lot of therapists don't work with health insurance. However, in some cases, you can ask them for a super bill and you can send it to health insurance and you can get it covered that way. It's more extra work on you, but at least it's covered. Some other things you should look at is do your research, look at their reviews, look at, their website, see if they're legit, all that other stuff before you go in. That way you know what you're getting yourself into and just seeing if they're legit. And also if they're open. Because with a lot of health insurances, including mine, they'll have like people on there, but the thing is that they don't update their list. So that person, you know, their like place may be like permanently closed or something like that. Also, keep in mind if you're transferring from therapist to therapist, and let's say you had a phenomenal therapist, but they don't take your health insurance anymore and you have to switch to somebody else, keep in mind that that therapist is probably not going to be the same as your other one, that golden one that you rave about. And there isn't going to be anyone else exactly like them out there. However, that doesn't mean that you still can't find somebody. And write down any questions that you may have for the therapist. Once you get there, ask if you can go back with your individual for the first session and take notice as to how the PT interacts with your individual. And if your individual or if you yourself are getting the therapy, be sure that you're happy. Because I can tell you this, but an unhappy individual or a bad therapist equals unsuccessful outcomes. You also want to be sure that they're talking to the individual at a level that's developmentally appropriate for them. So, for instance, let's say, you have a 14-year-old that acts and functions like a 14-year-old, but they baby him. And keep in mind while you're there and you're talking to the therapist and they're talking to you and interacting with your individual, you may have questions that'll arise, and that's completely okay. Feel free to write them down. And I actually have a template. I will link it down in the description in my Google Drive. It'll be a pros and cons list, questions that you want to ask, and then there'll be like a categories thing where things you absolutely have to have in the therapist, things that you absolutely don't want, and then things that you could care about either way, or you may not want that, but if you absolutely have to have a therapist with that, you're okay with it. Pause. I'm also going to make a table template where you can put down the name of the therapist, if they're in network, and just some other things about said therapist. Okay, back to the video. Also, if you yourself are receiving the therapy or your individuals receiving the therapy and they have a mobility aid, ask the therapist their stance on it. And if they don't believe in mobility aids and are very old school, then they need to go bye-bye. Also, check and be sure that the space is ideal for your individual or you, because there are a bunch of different settings. There's like group PT, which I haven't really seen, individual physical therapy. There are some that are offered in gyms, etc. Also, be sure that the therapist is creating a fun and engaging environment for either you yourself that needs the therapy or your disabled individual that needs the therapy. So, for instance, let's say your 2-year-old's getting done physical therapy and starts screaming and crying and just doesn't want to be there. How that therapist handles it is key. You know, let's say they decide to get out the bubbles and use bubbles as a distraction. That's great. Now, let's say the physical therapist chooses to do nothing about it and just push through or just gives up and sends the individual home, then that's the sign of maybe the therapist isn't as fun or as engaging. And also be sure to check for gaslighting. So, for instance, if you say something like, "Oh, my daughter has clubfoot," and the therapist takes a look at her and says, "No, she doesn't," without examining her, then that's gaslighting. And also, it's okay if different providers have different opinions. However, they should examine you or your individual first before they make any assumptions like that. Also, at the end of the session, it's best to ask them how much therapy the individual or you yourself would need if you're the one receiving it. Now, if you're using health insurance, the amount you pay for your therapy will remain the same. Pause. Now, I want to mention that as long as the facility and or the providers in network, you will pay the same fixed rate. And how you can obtain said fixed rate is either A, you can call your health insurance and figure it out, or B, I like to go on my health insurance patient portal and under benefits, I can type in the benefit and it'll pop up and let me know how much I have to pay. Okay, now back to the video. Pause. Now, I know I said back to the video, but y'all know me and know that I tend to ramble and forget things. Thanks a lot, ADHD. But inversely, if the provider is out of network, then you have to pay that particular place or provider's rate that they have for people that have to pay out of pocket for whatever reason. And what you could do is you could super bill health insurance after you've seen the provider, and if you haven't met your deductible, then it'll go towards that. And if you have, then they'll reimburse you, but they will not make adjustments for a fixed rate if the provider is out of network. Okay, back to the video. But after your visits run out and you still need more PT for your condition or any other type of therapy, the rates will vary. If it's more than the allotted visits you're allowed with your health insurance, ask how much it would cost to pay out of pocket. And note that some hospitals and some big facilities do have scholarship opportunities available for those that need it. Take a look at your financials and see if you're going to be able to afford that. And if you do end up having to pay out of pocket, and note that some places will charge more and some will charge less depending on the practice. And that's it. That's all the tips that I have. If you have any others, feel free to put them in the comments. And I do have a document. It's linked in the description in my Google Drive, but it's a blank template of a pros and cons sheet, and on the back it's going to have questions for the doctor, and then the third page will be a blank template stating like things that they have to have, like qualities and stuff, and things that I don't want out of the therapist, and things that I can be flexible with if they have to have it. And I thank you guys so much for watching this video and can't wait to see you guys again soon. Bye.